Okay. All right. So next up, we'll leader and their disciples. Leader and their disciples. This is huge. This particular outline is huge, and this tonight I'm going to honestly I'm going to attempt to maybe fix some things that have kind of gone awry over time, and so I'll just dive right into it, and we'll cover some of those as we go. So, are we rocks or are we sand? Or are we sand or are we rocks? That's huge when you talk about discipleship as it relates to our groups, but also just in general. You know, our vision here is to reach the lost and to train disciples. I'm in this mode right now to where I'm really trying to get back to the purity of our vision. You know, and with that, you kind of heard me even today reference, are we making disciples of a system, or are we making disciples of programs, or are we making disciples of things like that, or are we making disciples of Jesus? And so we need to revisit some of those things and get down to the purity of what Jesus told us to do, and that is to reach the lost and make disciples. Now that could mean one person discipling one person, or that could mean somebody starting a discipleship group. And I think when I say I want to attempt to begin to fix some things, I'm talking mainly as it relates to even our discipleship groups. You guys that are a part of discipleship groups, you can even see, especially you guys who have been a part of them for a long time, there's been some of the elements that have kind of drifted and just kind of by default settled into just kind of the program mindset of a Bible study. And so we're trying to begin to slowly rope those things back in and steer those things as we go back to the purity of the vision. And one of those things is true blue discipleship. That's the intention of these groups, is true blue discipleship, not just to have a Bible study, not just to throw a topic in the middle of the room and everybody fire things at that topic and say how much they know about that topic, and then everybody leave the room, leave that night feeling good about how much they know about that topic, but yet be challenged and to grow and to change our views and to fix our mindsets maybe where it needs to be tweaked a little bit, and so forth and so on, and to actually learn some things, and for us to be able to dig into our lives and dig into our hearts and be challenged to grow in God. As you guys heard this morning, the idea and the goal of all of this is to grow into the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ, right? And so that is kind of the drive, if you will, of our discipleship groups. Not just to come hear information, but to begin to be challenged. That takes a lot of things, right? It takes a lot of things that I can't even probably cover tonight. One of those is being vulnerable. Another one is to be teachable, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But there's some things there that requires, that even takes some shifts in our mindsets as 21st century Christians, right? And especially American Christians, is that, and one of those things is that our mindset as American Christians are very individualistic. Very individualistic. Don't challenge me. Don't get in my business. I don't want to be vulnerable. I don't want to open up in front of a group of people. I just want my own little space. I want to have what's going on in me to stay in me. I don't want anybody to know my weaknesses. I don't want anybody to know where I fail. I don't want anybody to know that I'm less spiritual than the reputation that I try to portray, or whatever. That whole individualistic mentality of the American church is quite counterproductive if you really think about it. And so we have to fight these things. But when we're talking about discipleship, let's rope this back in. I'm starting to trail off into other areas, but let's rope this into what we're doing tonight. Are we sand or are we rocks? A lot of those mindsets do play into, are we sand or are we rocks? Sand represents the multitudes. Sand represents the multitudes, and you can see that a great example of that is the story of Abraham. he talks about the descendants. Another example of that is the stars. You know, you can look at the stars. Your descendants will be that of the stars if you can't count them, right? Well, you fast forward to Jesus' day. Jesus had 12, and then he had 3. But then also on the other side of that coin, he had the multitudes. But you didn't see him spending a whole lot of time in an individual basis with the multitudes, right? They would follow him across the river or across the, not river, across the sea, and he would even tell them things like, well, you're following me because you got your belly full, right? You don't want real challenge, real discipleship. You came because you got your belly full, basically. And but then there are the 12 that lived life with him. There were the 12 that he challenged. There were the 12 that he would even say things like, ye of little faith. Like, come on, guys, snap to it, you know, kind of thing. There's things of challenge is what he would do to him. And then there were the 3 that he even, to a further degree, went and pulled them aside, and those were the ones that got to see the mountain of transfiguration and things like that. And so we can be the multitudes, or we can be the disciples. You know, we can feed the attitude of the multitudes, or we can feed the attitude of the disciples, right? In those mindsets. Sand is also shifting. It's not firm. Sand is shifting, not firm. The multitudes are very flighty. Honestly, if you talk to Nigel, being a traveling minister, right? And Nigel will tell you that a downfall or a negative, I guess, of what he does as a traveling minister is that he has to preach his best sermon every single Sunday. Like every time he gets behind the pulpit, he's got to preach his best sermon, right? Because if he comes to XYZ church, unless there's like relationship like we have, if he comes to XYZ church and he has like an off week for whatever reason, well, they won't have it back, right? So every week has to be an on, dynamic, on fire, like his best of his best every single time. It's because the multitudes are flighty. That's not his quote unquote disciples. If he comes to our church, right, and he has an off week, well, I'm still going to have him back. Because that's like my grandfather in the faith. That's like my grandfather in ministry. I'm going to have him back because I'm not a multitude in his life. I'm one of the 12. And so it doesn't matter if he has an off week or a good week or whatever. There's real deal relationship. You know, same with Pastor Mark. Same thing. So the multitudes can be flighty. They can, you know, they're the ones that are waving palm branches 1 minute in the triumphal entry, and the next minute they're saying crucify him, right? That's the sand. It's shifting and it's not firm. Next thing is sand cannot be built upon. For all of those reasons, sand can't be built upon. It's just not firm. Rocks are solid disciples. Solid disciples. Which are opposite of everything that we just pointed out about sand, obviously. I mean, this is the other side of that coin. And the last thing is rocks can be built upon. Rocks can be built upon. Any of y'all that build know that you got to have a solid foundation to build on, or that thing's going to sag, it's going to shift, it's going to lean, it's going to whatever, and you're going to have problems by the time it's all said and done if you don't build on a firm foundation. And so it's the same thing here. You want to build what you're doing on a solid foundation. Therefore, Paul tells Timothy, what I've taught you, commit to faithful men who will teach others also. Okay. So, are we the multitude or are we one of the 12? Are we one of the multitude or are we one of the 12? Characteristics of your 12. And listen, when I say 12, I don't want you to get wrapped up in the number 12, okay? There are a lot of people who look at small group ministry or cell ministry, discipleship ministry, whatever you want to call it, and they get hung up. You got to go for 12. You got to go for 12, 12, 12, 12, 12, or 10, or whatever. I don't want to get hung up on a number as much as a characteristic, if you will. To say the 12, when I say 12, I'm simply talking about your disciples, people who you are pouring your life into and you're discipling. That can be 1, it can be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way up to a dozen. I would say, you'd be hard pressed to find a guy who can really disciple more than probably about 10. And that's stretching it. That's really stretching it. I mean, y'all really think about that for a second. Think about your jobs. Right? How many hours you work in a week, and then you got your families on top of that. You're really hard pressed to really truly disciple any more than I would figure about 3 or 4 max. Discipleship is hard work. To really truly disciple somebody and pour into them is really it's hard work. It's messy sometimes. It takes time. It takes effort. And so don't get hung up on the number 12. What characteristics should I be looking for in a potential member of my team? Number 1, a heart for God and the vision. A heart for God and the vision. Why both? Why can't they just have a heart for God? Well, it is arguable that if they have a heart for God, they're going to have a heart for the vision. Okay, you can argue that, but they can say they love God all day long and want to pursue Him and yada yada, so forth and so on, right? And there's a level of relationship. But we got to know that people have a heart to multiply, a heart to replicate themselves into somebody else, right? If they're going to be, quote unquote, on my team, so to speak, then I got to know that they're going to pour. There again, Paul said to Timothy, what I've taught you, commit to other faithful men who will teach others also. So he was basically telling Timothy, look for people who won't just soak up information and just be a taker, but they're going to go and they're going to replicate themselves into somebody else. He told the disciples, go and make disciples. Well, they were disciples, right? So Jesus was predisposing by that the 12 that he had, or 11 at this point, were going to replicate themselves into somebody else and make other disciples. That's how Jesus changes the world, right? That's how we reach the world, is we replicate ourselves into somebody else. That's the vision, in essence. So, talent will only take a person so far, and skills can be taught. But a heart for God and a heart for the vision must be caught. Some things can be taught, some things have to be caught. And I'll just say this: the things that are caught by doing life together. Honestly, doing life together. And those things that are caught will be the things that are in the forefront of your, for lack of a better term, value system or whatever. It'll be what's on your heart. It's what's at the top of your heart. Those are the things that your disciples will catch from you. You can't really teach them and sit down. That's one thing that I don't like about this type of setting, right? I can teach you all sorts of things, but I see it time in and time out that we'll bring a group of people in here and I'll teach them the vision, right? And give them all this information. But then there are still times to where I have people that leave this classroom after having gone through this and they still just don't get it. Like, you can tell that they just don't get it. You can tell in their language and what they say. I'm not talking about like cussing, that sort of language. I'm talking about just kind of what they say. What do they talk? Do they talk discipleship or do they talk program? Do they talk discipleship or do they talk Bible study? Do they talk discipleship or do they talk that mindset of individualism that I was talking about early, right? So some things have to be caught. And those things that are caught are best caught by doing life with somebody. My daughter has a lot of my characteristics about her. And the reason why that is because we live together. We spend time together. I teach her by doing. I teach her by living, and she catches those things. I can also teach her information, but there, like I said, are things that have to be caught and can't really be taught. Second thing is a teachable spirit. These are the characteristics of things you're going to be able to. You're going to be looking for in people that are going to be a part of your team, quote unquote. A teachable spirit. This is huge. This is huge. If a disciple lacks faithfulness, they will not be trustworthy with other disciples. Here's where faithfulness meets a teachable spirit. You try to teach somebody something, and they get scared because they don't want to be vulnerable, and they run away. And you don't see them forever because they're not faithful, right? Faithfulness and teachability goes hand in hand together. You really are hard pressed to find one without the other. A person that's unteachable will be unfaithful. A person that's unfaithful will be unteachable, right? And so you find these together a lot. Look for a couple of things you can look for in this too. Is the cell attendance, your discipleship attendance. You can look at their this is SOL or School of Leaders. You can say the next level attendance. Those are just kind of markers. Look at their devotionals. Look at their tithing. Why do I say tithing? Well, he's talking about money again. No, where your money is, that's where your heart is, right? That's ultimately where your heart is. And so I can look at a person's finance and I can tell you where their faithfulness is. I can tell you where their heart is. I can tell you where their passion is. It's wherever their money goes. And I don't want you guys to misunderstand. I don't go and check tithe records. I don't know who tithes and who doesn't, okay? And so I don't want you to leave with that impression. I'm better off knowing. I tell Tammy, I don't want to know who tithes and who doesn't. Because when I'm standing in front of a pulpit, I never want to be at a place to where I'm thinking, oh, I know this is going on in their life. I'm going to stay off of that because they're a big giver or they're a good giver or whatever. And I stay off of those things because I never want that temptation. And so I don't check people's tithe records. But nevertheless, you can tell where people's heart is by where their treasure is. It's a biblical principle.
Where are the two attendants?
Next level, and discipleship group. Or cell, you can put cell.
So, okay.
Third thing, servant's heart. Third thing, a servant's heart. People that you're looking for to be on your team, that you're looking for to really pour your life into and replicate yourself into, they have to wind up having a servant's heart. Have to wind up having a servant's heart. And if I'm not mistaken, Faith really taught an awesome message on a servant's heart. Was it you that taught it this time? Taught a great message on servant's heart. So if you are here for that, be sure and go look that up online. Good leaders are not looking for position, but opportunity to serve. You never, quote unquote, finish paying your dues as a leader. You just don't. Example, guess who set the tables up? The chairs. You know, this morning for pastor's breakfast, I was in here setting it up for the pastor's breakfast. You know, I trucked it up here. CJ met me. I trucked it up here this afternoon to take the beds from Family Promise to St. Boniface. I was up here every day, you know, looking after the dinners for Family Promise. Things like that. You don't quote unquote grow out of serving, right? I'm never too big to set up chairs. I've honestly heard people in my past say, I don't set up chairs, or I'm too whatever to do this, that, or the other. And my response to that is, you know, that's ridiculous. You never quit, quote, paying your dues, because it's not paying your dues. It's a ministry. Ministry is service. Ministry is serving somebody. And so if you're going to be a leader, you have to be willing to serve. You have to have a servant's heart. It's not all about position. It's about serving. A good leader, cell leader will have the heart to serve their disciples. I think I've covered that quite enough. other than I'll say this. You have to be willing, when I say serve your disciples, I'm not even necessarily talking about relegating that to the building and what we do as an organization, such as, like I said, set up chairs and things like that, vacuum the sanctuary, whatnot. I'm not just talking about that brand of serving, but when you bring that to discipleship, it's going to pick up your disciple on the side of the road sometimes because maybe they run out of gas. It's meeting your disciple somewhere because they're having a hard time with their marriage or their kids or this, that, or the other, and they need somebody to speak into them. It's going and helping them do whatever they need hands to do at the moment because they just don't have enough help around. And so it can include, but not be limited to any of those types of things. That's serving an individual. It's serving a person in their life with what they need. You see Jesus doing that all the time, meeting the needs of people and then sharing the gospel with them. You know, it's serving people in their individual needs. Next thing, number 4, a team member must be able to be proven. Team member must be able to be proven. Leaders are on the front lines of the battlefield and a target of the enemy. On the front line of the battlefield and target of the enemy. I can't tell you how many times that people have come through next level classes and all of a sudden now they want to lead people, and all of a sudden they have a target on their back that they didn't realize was going to be there when they began to actually lead somebody. But now it's there. When you begin to lead somebody, you have more of a target on your back, and the enemy will begin to mess with you in ways that maybe he didn't before. And that's not to put fear in you. We have authority over the enemy, but there is an element to leadership that looks at your life and says, is this person able to withstand trial? Are they able to withstand the attack of the enemy? Because if they're not at this stage of the game, when you put them in leadership and that warfare, if you will, is kind of amped up a little bit, if they can't handle it here, they're not going to be able to handle it here. And if they're not able to handle it there, it's not just them and their family that they're affecting when they flake out. It's the people who they are leading that are messed with when they flake out. And so you have to think about that when it comes to leadership. Look for people who can stand up under pressure and not cut and run from adversity. That's kind of speaking to the same thing. Leadership is tested and developed in the fire. I wish that I could sit here and tell you, in one sense I wish it, in another sense I'm glad that I can't, but you know, I wish to some degree that I could sit here and tell you that, man, all of my 22 years experience in ministry have just been wonderful and great. It's been like a bed of roses, and ministry is awesome all the time. You'll never go through hard spots in your life. Like, everybody will always love you. Everybody will always appreciate you. Ministry is wonderful, always. Right? Have you ever heard, what's his name, Steven Tyler sing, "Dream on, dream on," right? It's just not that way. There's hard spots in leadership. There just is. Last 22 years of ministry, there's been hard spots here, hard spots there. There's been fire along the way. But you know what? When I've come through on the other side of the fire, I'm a stronger person. I'm better for it, right? I've grown through it. I've learned through it, you know, and it's made me better and better and better over the years. And so I thank God for these trials. And leadership is developed and is tested in these times. You must see every person as a leader. When I'm saying this, what I'm talking about is looking at people through potential. Like, I am the quintessential guy who will look at a rusted out, old, beat up, banged up car on the side of the road, and I'll think, man, that could look good. You know, if you throw a coat of paint on that thing, do some body work, get the engine running, slap some rims and tires on it, that thing could look good. And maybe, you know, the rest of the world would be like, what are you talking about? If you would have seen my house before I started on it, you would have, my dad even, he said, boy, when I saw that thing, I was like, he's never going to get that thing done. But I saw potential there. Like there was 2.5 walls, you know, in the whole place.
There was hardly anything there.
Did you see?
I did see
You did?
pictures.
It was awful. It was bad, but I saw potential. I could look at a house plan and lay that house plan that I had been working on that house plan for like 15 years. And I could take that house plan and just lay it right over the top of that little building that we started with. And it fit. If I knocked the end of it out 4 feet, it would fit perfect. And so I commenced to working on it because I saw potential. And you have to do that with people. You have to see the potential leadership qualities and abilities in them, and you have to kind of fish for that and kind of dig it up out of them. So see every person as a leader. You're not looking for the easy way out, nor those who are necessarily the most talented or gifted. I used to have a worship leader that it was the lady that I played drums for the first time ever. I learned drums under her ministry, and she used to tell me all the time, and I think she was just trying to encourage me because I stunk, but she would tell me, you know, talent is a dime a dozen. I could find drummers like all day long. I could find drummers, but to find a faithful drummer with a good heart, that's something that you don't see very often. Talent's a dime a dozen, but heart is just that's premium stuff right there. And so, yeah, I've actually seen that a lot in ministry. Look for the heart, not necessarily the gift. You can teach a lot of gifts, you can teach a lot of talents, I should say, but look for heart. You must win them in prayer. You must win them in prayer. There's always an element of prayer to what we do. There should always be an element of prayer to what you do. You've heard people say that everything natural comes from something supernatural. Everything that you see is birthed from things that you don't see. Well, a lot of what you see by way of churches, by way of groups, by way of disciples, by way of people actually living for the Lord is many times birthed when you can't see the leader of that person back in a closet somewhere praying for them, praying for qualities that they want to see rise out of them in leadership and godliness and so forth and so on. So it stands true in that aspect. You must be willing to pour your life into them. You got to be willing to pour your life into a team. Otherwise, they're, like I was talking about before, they're just not going to catch it. They're not going to catch what you need them to catch if you can't pour your life into them. That's what makes discipleship so messy. Because sometimes you're pouring your life into somebody and they're just broke up. Like they got like problems. They got issues in their life and you're trying to walk through this stuff with them. And sometimes you think they're to this level and you figure out, oh, maybe they're not. They're to this level. And you've just been pouring your life into them and you think they should be here, but they're really not. Sometimes that can be disappointing. Sometimes it can be discouraging. But nevertheless, you continue to pour your life into those people to grow them up in Christ. So, next and last thing, the leader and his disciples. Build unity in the team. Always try to build unity in the team. It's not a competition between them. I've seen people trying to compete for who's the most spiritual, who's the most knowledgeable, who's the closer to the leader kind of thing. There's all that insecurity stuff. There's no room for insecurity as it relates to your team. So try to build unity in your team. Second thing is teach them to grow. Teach them to grow in grace and knowledge, spiritual authority, and wisdom. Treat everything as a growth opportunity. You know, Jesus, you can see the perfect example in Jesus of that. He takes rowing across the sea as a growth opportunity to teach them not to fear. to teach them that he has power over the storm, right? To teach them all sorts, to teach them about faith. Just all sorts of, like, he takes an opportunity that he's passing by a fig tree to teach them all sorts of things out of that story. He teaches them, again, faith. He teaches them about man's lack of ability to cover up sin. He teaches them, again, of his power. You know, he teaches them the power of words. You can say all kind of things that he was teaching them through different situations like that. But look for opportunities to teach in everything that you do. Number 3, form extraordinary leaders. Extraordinary leaders. Ordinary just won't do. Don't let people off the hook with less than the standard of godliness that's in the Bible. And the standard of godliness that's in the Bible is perfection. You say, well, that's harsh. Wow, that's harsh. To say you expect people to be perfect. No, I don't necessarily think that people are going to be perfect, but we should all be striving for perfection. Why? Because Jesus said, you know, God says, be holy, for I'm holy. Right? He says, even what I talked about today in Ephesians 4, the perfect man. The goal is to grow up into the perfect man. That perfect meaning mature, right? So, don't let them off the hook with less than their potential. Build a platform for their success. Build a platform for their success. You know, there's one thing that this requires as a leader, is it requires a level of security from you, as opposed to like insecurity. An insecure leader doesn't want people around them to succeed, right? There was a guy in my life that said back 23, 4 years ago or so, and I'll always remember it probably till the day I die. He said, never be afraid to allow people to do 3 things. Never be afraid to allow people to let people go, because people will come in and out of your life at times, right? But then never be afraid to let people fail. Sometimes people need to fail because they need to know why the failure sometimes. And failure can actually build you up and make you stronger. But then the third thing is never be afraid to allow people to succeed. And succeeding will build them up. It'll allow them to realize what's actually in them. Success is a great thing, and you should always try to set your disciples up, set your team up for success. Next thing is teach them spiritual discipline. Teach them spiritual discipline. There was a time when I first started my discipleship group, back when I had a lot fewer people. Every single week, I would ask them one of a couple of questions. I would either ask them, what's the Lord showing you? And pass is not an answer. What you're reading currently in the Bible, and pass is not an answer. And what was the other one? There was one more. What's God showing you? What you've been reading in the Bible? I can't remember the other one. Anyways, but that was accountability to some just spiritual disciplines. Because I used to say this: if you haven't been reading the Bible, or God's speaking something to you in the last 7 days of your life, chances are you're not seeking Him enough, right? And I think that's pretty fair statement. It can sound a little harsh rolling off the tongue, right? But I think it's pretty fair to say the last 7 days of my life, if I haven't read one scripture in the Bible, boy, I'm just not in the Word enough. Or if God hasn't been speaking something to me, hasn't shown me something, hasn't corrected me of something, whatever the case may be, put something on my heart, whatever, then there's not a real living relationship going on there to the degree that it probably needs to be. Ask yourself that about your husband or wife, right? If you hadn't talked to your wife, your husband or wife in the last 7 days, if you haven't seen your husband or wife in the last 7 days, right? if you have experienced life with them in the last 7 days, chances are, unless you got like a special thing that like you're out of town on business or something like that, if that's a normal part of your life, chances are there's something going askew there in your marriage. And so it's the same concept. Create an environment, number 6, that attracts others. That attracts others. When people see you and your disciples, they ought to long for something in that relationship. There ought to be a longing there of something, for something in that relationship. Number 7, challenge them to a grand model of growth. Challenge them to a grand model of growth. That's a couple of different things. Number 1, growth in numbers. Am I excited just about numbers for numbers' sake? No. But if there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 people in the room, and then I commission you guys all to go out and reach somebody, then that predisposes that next week there should be more people in the room, which adds up to a greater number, right? So it's not for necessarily numbers' sake, but it's for reaching people's sake. It's for vision's sake. It's for being obedient to the what God has us on this earth to do sake. And so the growth in that aspect must come. I shake my head when I hear people saying things like, "Well, I'm just happy with our small little church. I never want our church to grow." And to say that is just absurd when you really think about that statement. Yes, there are things about a small congregation that you enjoy. You do enjoy that more intimate fellowship with all the people involved there. But to say I never want our church to grow is to say I never want our church to reach anybody. And that's just counter gospel. If you really think about it, that's counter the mission that God has us here for. Because if we're reaching people, that means we're growing, right? Anything that's not growing is dying. Look at it in nature. Anything not growing is dying, or it's not alive to begin with, one of the two. So challenge it to a grand model of growth. And that's not just people growth as far as size and number, that's also personal spiritual growth. Don't allow your disciples and people on your team to lay stagnant, but challenge them to continue to grow. There are things that I do, Paul will tell you, there are things that I do in my discipleship group that it almost seems sometimes that I'm picking at people. I'm like picking, getting them to do things. But it is kind of that I'm picking, I am picking, but a lot of times it's to instigate growth, to instigate people to dig into the Word. Yeah, promotion, it's about promotion. To instigate people to dig in their relationship with God and to think about something in a different angle and to consider what God can do in various things. And so challenge your people to a grand model of growth. And number 8 and last thing, show them that everything, everybody say everything. Everything is kingdom, and kingdom is everything. It's about the kingdom of God. It's about the kingdom of God being propelled on this earth. It's about the kingdom of God being established on this earth. He even told the disciples, pray like this, thy kingdom come, thy will be done here on this earth, as it's already been done in heaven. So keep it about the kingdom. Don't keep it about a system. Don't keep it about a meeting. This is one of the downfalls that I've seen about leaders in the past, is they'll go out, they'll start a discipleship group, and it'll become very quickly about the meeting. You know, my group, say, is on Wednesday night. There's nothing other than Wednesday night. It's about that meeting, meeting, and it very quickly becomes into a Bible study. And there again, I've seen, you know, that in our church and in our small groups. I've seen that beginning to happen over the last few years or so, which is why, or there again, I'm kind of bringing it in for a huddle, and kind of getting back to the pure form of the vision that God's given us to do. And so that's the leader and your disciples. Amen.